The term mental health is a fallacy. It comes preloaded with a suggestion that a person's mental state is a health issue. For a person's mental state to be a health issue, there must be a clearly defined difference between health and sickness, backed up by scientific evidence to define what is normal function. But the definition of normality when it comes to mental health is defined by an unscientific, politically driven ideology that has changed multiple times to fit with a changing political agenda. There is no science whatsoever to support the existence of a mental illness. Mental illnesses are invented in pharmaceutical boardrooms for the purpose of pushing and selling drugs. There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance, even though the concept is pushed heavily on the public to coerce them into accepting psychiatric drugs. Chemical imbalance theory was refuted decades ago. To this day, no one knows the action by which any psychiatric drug works. That's because they don't work. They target the brain by inflicting brain damage. They cause, not cure, mental problems. Mental problems are real, mental illnesses are not. Depression is not a disease. It is a normal reaction to traumatic events. If the trauma continues, a person will go into a depressed state. This is entirely normal, and functions much in the same way as a plant goes into hibernation in the absence of water, to conserve its energy and protect itself. Sometimes, a person can become fixated on a past traumatic event that has been resolved, and they can go into depression as a result. That type of depression is not a mental illness, but an ideological virus, a bad habit they pick up. There are some people who claim to be depressed without a reason, therefore justifying the existence of this so-called disease, but that is nonsense. Depression always has a reason, and their lack of knowledge comes from a far greater problem of extreme ignorance. It's true that you can detect brain differences in people with depression, but this is an effect of depression, not the cause. Hence why antidepressants don't work and are the #1 cause of depression. They cause depression by maintaining a vulnerable, altered state of awareness that promotes ignorance, therefore propagating ideological viruses and bad habits. Attention deficit disorder is not a disease. Many children are drugged in the name of this imaginary illness, simply because they are hyperactive and don't pay attention in class. This is normal for children, who should be outside playing and learning the way nature intended. By labeling them mentally ill and drugging them, they turn children into brain-dead zombies who are easy to control. Adults who are labeled with AD or ADHD are not mentally ill either. They are simply assholes with bad habits, who make poor life choices. Schizophrenia is not a real disease. Schizophrenia is a breakdown of mental function, meaning a shattered mind. Sometimes this can be provoked by brain damage. The reason why people have a shattered mind is because they are intensely shallow, self-obsessed and have no mental discipline. This leads to a disconnection with reality, as they obsessively indulge comforting fantasies. Doing this for a long time causes brain damage and atrophy, making the problem even worse. The problem is not biological, but ideological. Mental illnesses are an entirely fictional construct, designed to label and smear people for political reasons. When a person frequently breaks the law, they are labeled mentally ill. When a person is upset with their quality of life, they are labeled mentally ill. When a person goes against the official government narrative, they are labeled mentally ill. In the USSR, millions of people were imprisoned in psychiatric facilities, tortured and executed with psychiatric drugs, in the name of a mental illness, called sluggish schizophrenia. All political opponents were targeted. This is an example of what goes on today in psychiatry. Whistleblowers are kidnapped, taken to psychiatric facilities where they are labeled with bizarre mental illnesses, to discredit them, and they are tortured for the rest of their lives behind closed doors. No evidence is required for the government to do this. All they need to do is simply accuse you, and they are given authority to kidnap you. This is what happens to any government target who has not committed a crime. Psychiatry is an ancient profession that once focused on torture and execution. It was their purpose to propagate fear, to control the masses. If anyone challenged the government, they were tortured and executed by psychiatry. About 100 years ago, psychiatry was a dying profession as democracy and human rights became dominant. The masses rejected psychiatry. Psychiatry then called itself psychiatry, and attempted to recreate itself as a medical profession, using fake medical terms and creating nonsense theories to defend their attempts at mind control and horrific human experimentation. Examples of this are: 1. Trepanning, the practice of drilling holes into people's heads, and pouring alcohol into the hole, to cure the victims. 2. Transorbital lobotomy, the practice of poking the victim into their eye socket and piercing their brain with an ice-picking hammer, and rotating it around in circles to inflict brain damage and separate the hemispheres, to cure the victims. This practice was only recently stopped, and still happens sometimes. 3. Electroconvulsive therapy, the practice of hooking the victim's brain up to 400 volts of electricity, and repeatedly frying their brain. This practice is still in widespread use today. 4. Other examples include insulin shock, straitjackets, seclusion, forced drugging, imprisonment, deprivation, suffocation, drowning, inducing hypothermia, starvation, terror, removal of body parts, inducing coma, hanging upside down, mummification, malaria, poison, fire, and even death, all in the name of curing them of imaginary diseases. An example of modern psychiatry is in Chelmsford, Sydney, where 2 psychiatrists who both murdered their wives, kidnapped 1,000 people. They strapped them down to hospital stretchers for 3 months, and electrocuted them in the head every day, all in the name of curing them of imaginary mental illnesses, such as being overweight. Many of the victims died during the so-called treatment. Many others died a short time after. Many committed suicide immediately after they were set free.